Hello again, my little conscripts, and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Morty and Glory video. In today's episode, I want to do something a little bit different. Rather than taking you through a quick tip tactica or a unit review, instead, I want to regale you with a story. This is a tale of the most toxic person I have ever come across in Warhammer 40k. The worst tournament player I have ever encountered, and the most blatant and vile cheater I have had the misfortune to come across. This is a story of an incident that is so insane that you would be forgiven for believing it was entirely made up and fictional. I assure you that it is not. This is a story that is so bonkers you will be thinking that I am exaggerating points for effect. Again, I promise you, I am not. Everything that you are about to hear in the story is 100% true and unexaggerated. And the best bit is, you don't need to take my word for it, because there were dozens of witnesses who could confirm and corroborate what I'm about to talk about. And so without further ado, I'll stop edging you guys. I'll stop blue balling you. Let's crack on with today's video. So the first thing that I want to do is set the scene for you guys, give you a little bit of background information. This story takes place about 4 or 5 years ago, right in the middle of Warhammer 40k 8th edition. This was a really exciting time to be in the hobby because tournaments were just exploding left, right and center. 8th edition really was a shot in the arm for the community, and you had loads of people that had returned to the game or ones that had picked it up for the first time. Tournaments were full of fresh-faced and eager people who had spent the beginning of the edition building their armies together and learning the game, and they were now ready to start hitting the tournament scene. But there was still this core of long beard, or should I say neck beard, old school tournament player. The ones that had been playing through 6th and 7th, the ones that were used to the toxicity of that edition, and they did bring some of that into 8th with them. Now, at this time, for myself, I was just hitting my stride as a tournament player. I'd played a lot of 7th edition events, but none of them had ever really mattered because I was running guard in 7th, and the faction was so unusably bad that I could go to an event of 100 people and be the only guard player there. But going into 8th edition, I'd gone to loads of events and I tried out all the cool meta guard stuff like the unbreakable blobs of conscripts and all that kind of good stuff. But I'd got a little bit bored of doing that and I wanted to start spreading out, stretching out. And so I started taking more fun lists to events. In fact, my go-to army at that point was my fluffy Armageddon Steel Legion list. Now, for those of you that don't know, a little bit of anecdote, a little bit of side information about me here, but Armageddon Steel Legion are actually probably my joint favorite old school regiment alongside the Mordians. Before I got into running pure infantry and Mordian Iron Guard tactics, I was all about them tanks. I was a treadhead through and through, but I hadn't really been able to run my tanks for a long time because they'd been so bad. But I decided, you know what, I'm going to relive my childhood days. I'm going to get together my Steel Legion army. I'm going to completely restore it and rebuild it. And I'm going to start taking it to some events just because I want to see the OG gas mask boys on the tabletop. This meant that as a player, I was pretty experienced. I had survived my 15 hours. I had the Honorifica Imperialis. I had the Medallion Crimson from all those beatings I'd taken in 7th edition. But my army list was pretty newbie, and so you could be forgiven for looking at the list and going, oh, well, this guy is just a bit of a new player. He's one of the fresh blood into 8th edition. For those of you that are curious, my army list was centered around mechanized infantry, and the army was called the 234th Armageddon Mechanized Dragoons. The force was made up of 6 squads of infantry, each one in a chimera with double heavy bolter, and there was a heavy stubber on top. And the lore behind it, I'd really gone into the lore, was that my Steel Legion preferred to use solid slug weapons like bolters, like stubbers, like they were armed with auto guns and this kind of stuff, and they were running like grenade launchers and all this, and heavy bolters. And the whole thinking was because Orcs respect Daka, so if you shoot like a little lasgun at them, it's like zip, zip, zip. They don't really register that as incoming fire, but if you shoot like big machine guns at them, it's like boo, 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 like Daka, 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 Daka. Orcs are going to respect that, and it's going to have a psychological impact on them as well. Also, at the time, the lore around Armageddon starting to get messed with by demons was popping up, and so I also said that every single tank had a special box of ammunition for each weapon that were sanctified rounds. Each round had been blessed and had been inscribed, scratched into with little blessings and hymns of the Emperor, so that when they shot them at demons, it would have an extra effect against them. I'd put all this down, I had all this written, and I just was really getting into that style of playing 40k and really embracing the narrative and forging it. Backing up the Armored Fist squads, I had 4 or 5 Lehman Russes. I had a couple of Demolishers, couple of Executioners, and a Battle Cannon one. And all of the tanks had the same sponsons, because I love sponsons. I've always been a sponson guy. And they had Plasma Cannon sponsons, and they had Heavy Bolters in the front. And then just for a little bit of fun and flavor, just to represent that no armored column would be complete without some kind of recon force leading the way, I had 3 Armored Sentinels in the force. And I always preferred Armored Sentinels because, again, diving into that old school Steel Legion fluff, they used to have Armored Sentinels. That was the Armageddon pattern, and they used to come with like plasma cannons and las cannons. And that's exactly what I had on my Sentinels as well. So as you can tell from that, this army really was a labor of love for me. I'd spent about 6 months meticulously putting the army together, reading into the lore, really marinating myself into the narrative, and I'd also got a lot of practice with it, and I'd caught quite a few people off guard with my maverick mechanized tactics. So now that you are armed with that context and background information, let us advance into the story proper and actually start talking about this game where I encountered the worst person in 40k. The person I will now be referring to as Bill the Bastard. So the tournament where I encountered Bill was a 2-day grand tournament, and it was game number 4. It's the first game of day number 2. Now, my first day at the event had gone pretty well. I'd managed to win my first game, but then unfortunately had lost my second one against a Imperial Knight player. Knights at the time were very much a gatekeeper faction. And then my third game, I had managed to squeak out a very narrow victory. But all of the games have been really close, and I hadn't scored particularly highly in any of them, but I had managed to go 2 wins and 1 loss. At the end of day number 1, as I am packing my army up, Bill comes up to me and says, "Oh, hi, are you Tim? My name is Bill. I think we're going to be playing each other in game 4 tomorrow." I, of course, go, "Oh, hi, Bill, how's it going?" We engage in some pleasant conversation, and I realize that Bill is the Tau player that I've seen across the gaming hall. Now, Bill has been very conspicuous during the event because he was running a really, really powerful list. It sounds kind of comical now in the context of 9th and looming 10th edition, but he was running 2 Forge World Tiger Shark bombers. These things are insane. They are massive, and they were the scourge of the meta at the time. They were a classic case of Forge World rules that had been just ported over from 7th to 8th, not really checked all that much, and they'd slipped through the GW net somehow, and they ended up getting discovered by meta players, and they were really, really broken and overpowered. But they were also very, very expensive. I mean, each one is the size of a dinner plate, if not bigger, and the vast majority of his points were taken up by these 2 models. But because they were so powerful, naturally Bill had won all 3 of his games, and I distinctly remember remarking at the time going, "Oh man, I am really surprised that we're going to be playing each other tomorrow, because I've lost a game and there are other people here that have won all 3, and I know you've won all your games massively because you've got such a cool list, so I'm really surprised that we are playing each other." He hesitates for a moment and goes, "Oh, well, it's just because you've done so well in your games." I remember thinking, I haven't done that well in my games. I've got 2 very narrow wins and 1 relatively bad stomping against the Knights. So that doesn't really make sense. Subconsciously, I was thinking, that doesn't ring true at all. With the benefit of hindsight, I now know this was the first of many bastard behaviors of Bill. You see, he was an unofficial tournament organizer for the event, and you have to understand that this was before things like best coast pairings or anything like that automatically handled pairings and tables. It was all done on Excel sheets, and it was all done by TOs essentially pulling levers and manually working out who was going to go against who, roughly based on score. Now, Bill was an unofficial TO for this event, because the actual TOs were very inexperienced. It was actually one of their first, maybe their second ever event that they had run, and Bill had given them a lot of help getting themselves off the ground because he was a really experienced TO. He ran loads and loads and loads of events up in the north of the country. He was well known in that area, and so he had said, look, I'll come down, I'll help you get started, and then we can, make sure everything goes smoothly. I now understand that Bill did this so that he could influence the pairings that he got throughout the event. He would make sure that he could see everyone's list, because they all had to be submitted 2 weeks in advance, and before the event even began, he would pick out people that he would want to play against and then make sure that he ended pairing against them. This explains how Will, with the equivalent of 3 maxed out victories, was able to pair up against me game 4 when I had 2 very minor wins and a pretty bad loss. But like I said, I didn't have any of this knowledge or information at the time. All I knew was that subconsciously something didn't quite feel right. The pairings hadn't even been officially announced at that point yet. They wouldn't be announced for several hours later. So it was strange how Bill knew he was going to be playing against me, but I just shrugged it off and assumed, well, he's a TO, he's probably got a good idea of roughly who he's going to play against. That's it. But unfortunately, I wouldn't have to wait long to get my second indication that this game was going to be a bad one. Because after the pairings were announced, everyone was checking who they were against, but also they were checking who their friends were going to be against. And I was part of a number of Facebook groups, and we were all chatting, we were all at this event, and we were going, oh man, that's going to be a difficult game for you. Or, oh, that's really good for you. And then people saw who I was playing. And 3 people independently, no group coordination whatsoever, privately messaged me and said, you're going to have to be careful in that game versus Bill. And I was like, why? What's the matter? And they said, and I'm obviously condensing 3 conversations just to simplify it, but they all said independently, he's a sneaky player. He's a cheat. He will fast roll his dice. He will roll his dice behind buildings. He will pick up 2s when he only hits on 3s and all this kind of stuff. You're going to have to keep a really close eye on him. Now, let me be clear. This alone is bonkers. I have never, before or since, in over a decade of going to tournaments, been pre-warned about how bad my opponent is going to be the next day. Not by 1 person, not by 2, but by 3 separate people who don't know each other. We're all just part of this competitive Facebook group. It was very disconcerting, to say the least. But despite this, I resolved to go ahead with the game anyway. Maybe it was a little bit of naivety. I thought, oh, well, if I do manage to beat this guy, it'll make the victory all the sweeter. But also, it was kind of like an honor thing. I had never dropped from a game before. I'd never dropped from a tournament before, even if I had lost every single game. I always had a policy of, I've paid for the ticket, the TO's made the effort to put the event together. People dropping from events can really mess up pairings. Look, I'll just go for it, and if I manage to win, it'll be great, and if I don't, well, then whatever, it's only a game of toy soldiers, right? And so with a sense of trepidation and nervousness, I go into my game number 4 versus Bill. And right from the off, it was sus. So the first thing that you do when you're playing against someone at an event is you take them through your army list. Both sides explain what they've got, warlord traits, important information, that kind of good stuff. Just means that your opponent is able to go into the game well informed. Now, Bill asked me first, he goes, okay, Tim, what's in your list? And I take him through, and I'm Armageddon Steel Legion, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, oh, right, can you explain what Armageddon Steel Legion does? Because I've never seen that before. Because at the time, everyone was running Cadian and Catachance. They were the competitive regiment traits. And I go, oh, well, Armageddon Steel Legion means that I ignore AP -1 on all of my vehicles, and I also get an 18-inch rapid fire. And straight away, Bill goes, okay, so do you reduce AP by 1 or do you ignore AP1? And I go, I ignore AP1, but I'm still affected by AP2. And he goes, without missing a beat, almost like he's giddy with excitement, he goes, oh, well, unfortunately, mate, that trait's not going to be really a thing in our game because all my armies AP-2 or better. Now, I knew this wasn't true because I actually play against Tau a lot because one of my brother's main armies was Tau. I grew up playing against Tau. I have many childhood memories of 3rd edition Tau beating my face in when I didn't know what I was doing. So I've played against Tau for a decade at this point. And I've played against Tau in 8th edition a lot because my brother was maining them at the time. And straight away, I smell shit. So I say to the guy, okay, can you explain to me what actually is AP-1 and AP-2 or higher, because I need to know what's in your list. And he goes, oh, well, you know, it's 2 Tiger Sharks, man. I'm like, yeah, but you've also got Long Strike and 3 Hammerheads, and you've also got some infantry. And so can you take me through what's actually in your list? And he's like, well, Long Strike and all the Hammerheads have got iron cannons, and they've also got all the smart missile systems. And I'm like, oh, okay, so the smart missile systems are AP-1. And he's like, no, they're AP-2. And I'm like, they're not, mate. I play against Tau all the time. Like, they're AP-1, I'm sure of it. I said, look, if you got your codex, we can just check this and resolve it. And he goes, oh, well, I haven't got my codex. But then he brushes past it and it's like, but, you know, it's fine. They're not even anti-tank dudes, so it won't even matter against you. You know, they're anti-infantry. And I went, well, you know, the volume of fire there, you've got 8 of these things across your 4 tanks. It might matter. And he goes, well, we'll get to it when we get to it. I'm like, oh, okay. So take me through these Tiger Sharks then. What are in the Tiger Sharks? These are pretty big Forge World units. And he goes, okay, well, they've got 8 Seeker missiles each. They're like hunter-killer missiles. And I'm like, yep, cool. I know what they do. And he goes, and they've also got these 2 twin heavy burst cannons, or they've got 2 heavy burst cannons. And I'm like, okay, so heavy burst cannons are AP-1, right? And he goes, no, they're AP-2. And I'm like, mate, I know they're only AP-1 because my brother has Riptides and they're only AP-1 on Riptides. And he goes, well, these are special Forge World ones, so they're not the same. You know, they're experimental Forge World ones. They're big ones, look, they put them on the ship. I'm like, okay, well, let's just check, because obviously it's going to matter how I deploy. I need to know what I can hide and what I can't hide. So let's just check. Have you got the Forge World book? And he goes, no, I don't have the Forge World book either. I'm like, okay. You have a Battle Scribe printout. Do you have Battle Scribe on your phone? He's like, no, I don't. I'm like, okay. So I try and get Battle Scribe on my phone, but unfortunately the venue that we're playing in didn't have any Wi-Fi, didn't have any phone signal. So I literally had no way of being able to verify this. So I'm like, okay, well, again, mate, that is pretty big. They're your main damage dealers, and I'm 99% certain that these heavy burst cannons are only AP-1. So we're going to have to try and resolve this before we go any further. So I say, look, I'm not going to get into an argument with you, mate. We need someone to rule on this. I'm going to get the TO involved. Call the TO over. I mean, the game's not even started. I'm having to do this. It's pretty bleak. And I explain the situation, and the TO goes, oh, well, I played against this exact list last week. I played against Will last week, and it was all AP2 in there, so it's AP2. And I was like, okay, yeah, but it might have been wrong in that game. And they're like, no, like, I'm pretty certain it's AP2. Look, I've got to make a ruling. You guys are already delayed in starting your game. So, look, it's AP2. Carry on with the game. Now, some of you might be a bit, well, Mordian, did you push the point? Unfortunately, you can't. In every tournament rules pack, it basically says, once the TO has made the decision, you have to just get on with the game. Because it's not the TO's job to necessarily get every ruling right, but it's the TO's job, it's the judges, it's the referee's job to keep the game rolling. That's their job. And so the TO had made a ruling. And I knew it wasn't right, but they made a ruling, and so we had to crack on. And we've been told we had to crack on, so it was time to get the game started proper. So then we start the game. And the first thing that we had to do was determine which player got which deployment zone, which side of the board they were going to play on. Now, unlike in 9th edition, where all the terrain is pretty much a mirror match and rolling off to see who gets which side doesn't really matter, 8th edition was a complete Wild West. Boards were mostly set up for how they looked and not really set up for their competitive value. And so in this case, there was actually a good side and there was a bad side. There was a side that had a big hill on it that you could hide all of your forces behind. And there was a side that had a little bit of walls and terrain and maybe a building, but not a huge amount. So we roll off to see who's get which side. I managed to roll a 5. And Will then rolls and goes, he's like, right, I'm going to use my lucky dice. And you roll the dice and he got a 6. And he's like, okay, I'm going to pick the side with the big hill that I can hide my army behind. I'm like, okay, right, fair enough. So we then deploy our armies. We need to roll off who's going to get first turn. Now, again, the terrain is fairly sparse. There's one hill that Will has essentially been able to hide his 4 hammerheads behind, but the rest of it's relatively exposed. There's a few well-shaped ruins, but it's relatively exposed. Also, he can't hide his flyers. So if I get first turn, I can probably blow one of those flyers out of the sky, and that's really going to cause him a big problem. So we roll the dice. Now, I end up rolling a 6, and I'm like, yes, okay, that's really good. And then Will rolls with his lucky dice again and gets a 6. And that means we have to re-roll. So we roll again, and I managed to get a 5. And I'm like, okay, that's pretty good. And he rolls the lucky dice again and gets a 6. Yeah. I'll let you guys draw your own conclusions about that dice. But moving swiftly on, we then get into the first turn. And Bill comes flying forward with his planes and with his army, and he starts unloading into me. And straight away, he's rolling his dice very quickly. Every single time he rolls them, he's consistently picking up misses. Like he'll grab 2 or 3 misses from the periphery, put them to one side, and then scoop the rest of the dice up. And I have to say to him, like, mate, you picked up 3 2s there, or mate, you picked up a couple of 3s there when you shouldn't have done. And it's every single time. And he consistently just goes, oh yeah, you're right, and just takes 3 dice out. Oh yeah, you're right. So he knows he's doing it, and I'm just catching him and I'm stopping him. And it's exhausting. Every single time he's rolling a dice, he'll pick up an extra hit. Every single time he rolls a wound, he picks up an extra hit. And every single time I'm there going, mate, you picked up an extra one there. And every single time he goes, oh yeah, you're right, of course. I don't wound tanks on 2s. It's like, no, you don't. You're wounding Leman Russes on 4s with a lot of your weapons because you are strength 8 and this is toughness 8. But despite all this, his shooting is kind of lackluster. Because at the end of the day, it's a pure tank list, guys. It's very durable. And in 8th edition, tanks could get cover. So all of my vehicles are on a 2+ save where they can get it. And it means that a lot of his stuff is bouncing off me, even though it should be AP nothing. And I'm actually on a 4-up save against a lot of this, or a 5-up in certain cases. I managed to make a few saves here and there. And the end result is, near the end of his shooting phase, he's killed a Chimera or 2, maybe killed 1, damaged 1, and he's blown up a Leman Russ, and he's killed a Sentinel. Not crippling damage at all. But then we get to the Seeker missiles. Now, in 8th edition, Seeker missiles, Hunter Killer missiles, any kind of one-shot rocket that you could strap to a vehicle was a pretty common upgrade, and they were almost identical in every single army. You spent 5 points, you got a one-shot crack rocket. Strength 8, AP -2, D6 damage. And so I was very familiar with them because my brother used to love using them against my tanks, and I'm very familiar with them because I play guard and I could turn up to a game with 20 Hunter Killer missiles if I want to, with all the Sentinels and everything. All right. So Bill rolls his dice to hit and he does okay. And then he rolls his dice to wound and he gets a whole sea of 3s, loads of them. And basically means he gets maybe 1 or 2 wounds, nothing serious. And he goes, oh, well, there's 6 wounds. And I'm like, how is there 6 wounds there, mate? There's 4 3s here. And he goes, yeah, they wound you on 3s. And I'm like, it's strength 8, toughness 8. He goes, no, Seeker missiles are strength 9. I'm like, no, mate, they're not. And I explained to him how I play against Tower of Time again. I explained to him how the Hunter Killer missiles, I show him the Hunter Killer profile and I go, look, they're the same. And he goes, no. You see, these are the special Forge World ones. These are Tau ones. They're not the same as your guard ones. They're better than your guard ones. I'm like, honestly, I am just so certain of this. And he goes, well, let's see if it makes a difference. So I'm like, okay, fine. I roll the dice to, make my saves. And he goes, oh, no, you don't get any saves. And I'm like, wait, what? He's like, yeah, you don't get any saves. They're AP -4. And I'm like, they are not AP4, dude. They're AP2. They're a crack rocket. And he goes, they're not a crack rocket. They're special tile ones, the special forged ones. I'm like, well, that just means my tank's dead. And it's like, it just wouldn't be. You know, you wouldn't have wounded me. And he goes, no, your tank's definitely dead, dude. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to have to get the TO over. And I get the TO over. And when I come back, he's taken my tank off the board and he's put it in my dead pile. I'm like, bro, where's my tank gone? He's like, it's in the dead pile. And I went, why have you removed it? And he goes, well, it's dead. You said your tank would be dead, so it's dead. And I said, dude, I'm getting the TO so we can weigh in. And the TO goes, I explain the situation, and the TO goes, well, again, we can't check it, but I'm pretty certain they were strength 9 APs 4 when we played. And he goes, well, and also, you know, the tank's dead now. It's off the field. You've kind of just got to, you can't retrospectively start, you know, going back on things. I'm like, I said, I didn't even remove my tank. And he goes, okay, look, lads, it's one tank, just play on. And at this point, the TO is getting pretty frustrated because he's probably been called over like 3 times at this point. And I'm like, okay, fine, we'll play on. I shouldn't have lost almost anything at this point, but I'm 2 Russes and 2 Chimeras down, and I've not had my first turn, but fine, fuck it, we'll just play. TO's ruled again. I even tried pushing back a little bit. TO got visibly annoyed. I don't want to push my luck. Fine. Done. Let's go into my first turn. So it gets into my first turn, and I'm a little rankled, but I managed to keep a calm head. And I look at the situation, and I notice 2 key mistakes that Bill had made. Firstly, he had positioned his Tiger Sharks in such a way that it would be possible for me to destroy one by stopping it from being able to land. In 8th edition, you couldn't fly your planes off the board and bring them back on. If they couldn't turn, they couldn't physically stay on the board, they would count as being automatically destroyed. Also, if they couldn't be physically placed, they would count as being automatically destroyed. And I'm like, okay, I've got a couple of Chimera squads back here, and I measure out the angles that this plane could go to, because it's only got like a 90-degree turn. And I'm like, okay, well, it can't go left. It has to go straight on, maybe a little bit to the left. If I take these 2 infantry squads out, I hide them behind this terrain, and I spread my Chimeras out, and I measure it really precise. I'm like, there's no way that plane could land. And I explain all this to Bill, and he goes, no, I can land there. And I go, no, mate, look, this is the size of your big base. It's a big flying base. So look, actually, you'd land on that guardsman, and you can't land there. He goes, oh, well, I could land over there. And I go, no, you can't, because my Chimera's there. So you would touch the edge of the, quite a significant part. You touch the Chimera's track. And he goes, oh, I'm sure I'll be able to land it. I go, look, before we do any of the movement, I said, I've got another squad. I can spread out if I need to. Just tell me, you go and measure it, you go and verify it, and I'll watch you, and you tell me if you can land. And he measures and measures and measures, and he can't land. He goes, yeah, that plane will be destroyed next turn. I'm like, okay, so that's established, that's locked in. He goes, yeah, that is locked in. Mistake on my end. I'll have to learn from that one. I'm like, okay, fair enough. So now that I know one of his 2 Death Star Tiger Sharks is going to be destroyed without me having to fire a shot at it, I know I can go after the other linchpin of his force. Because the Tiger Sharks were actually these giant distraction counterfexes, and they were so heavily armored and everything, I probably wasn't going to destroy one. But the main damage dealers were actually his hammerheads, because he had 4 of them. 3 regular ones and long strike. And long strike gives those hammerheads +1 ballistic skill, so they're hitting on like 2s, and he even gives them like +1 to wound against vehicles as well, so they're pretty gnarly. But I know that if I destroy long strike, the regular hammerheads aren't that big a deal, because I can pop smoke, which makes it mean they're only going to hit me on 4s, which is terrible for Tau. And I also know how important long strike is, because you guessed it, my brother uses him all the time. Many a time has the Imperial Armored Corps faced off against the Tau Rapid Reaction Force of my brothers. And many times have I faced down for hammerheads, whether it's with pure infantry or whether it is with my tanks. I have faced those down a lot, and I know what long strike does. If I can kill long strike, I can really, and destroy that plane, the game actually swings into my favor massively. And so I go to shoot at long strike, and I start, and Bill, without missing a beat, goes, okay, well, long strike's going to be -1 to hit. And I'm like, how is long strike -1 to hit? he says, well, there's a stratagem that I can use on him to make him -1 to hit. It's called System Jammer. Now, I was vaguely aware of this stratagem existing, but if it did exist, I was really surprised that my brother had never used it against me. So I'm like, are you sure it works? Like, you just pick one of your units and I get -1 to hit against it. And he was like, yeah, that's exactly how it works. It's like popping smoke, essentially, except for I'm jamming your system. Anything that tries to get into him, it's being jammed. I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, it sounds familiar, but I'm just surprised my brother's never used it. As it turns out, guys, that stratagem is not -1 to hit on a friendly vehicle. A battlesuit commander has to be within 12 or 18 inches of one enemy unit. And then that enemy unit, that one enemy unit, gets -1 to hit. Now, this is a really big problem for me because I'm playing guard. I'm most ballistic skill 4. If you put me down to ballistic skill 5, a lot of my shots are going to go wide. So anyway, I'm like, look, I just got to kill Longstrike. I kill that and I'm still in the game. So I start unloading with my tanks. And they do all right. But they're struggling to get the hits through. But I'm doing okay. I get Longstrike down a few wounds. And then I get to my final Leman Russ Executioner. Maximum Plasma Death Ball. And this thing unleashes the righteous fury of the Emperor. I overcharge everything. And I get +6 on the number of shots from the plasma turret. And I get +6 on the plasma cannons on the side. Which means in total I fire 18 shots between the D3 plasma and the D6 plasma. And this thing just unloads and unloads. And it manages to get Longstrike down to just 1 wound. And I go, it's all right. I've still got the heavy bolter. And despite the fact I was hitting on 5s, I rolled the heavy bolter. I got 3 hits. I rolled the heavy bolter. And I got 3 wounds. Bill rolls his saves. And he fails 1 of them. He then re-rolls it with a CP. And he fails it again. And he goes, okay, so Longstrike's left on 1 wound. And I go, no, Longstrike had taken 12 wounds. Back in 8th, he only had 13 wounds. He's taken 12 wounds. That's his final wound off. He's gone. And he goes, no, Longstrike has 14 wounds. I'm like, bro, seriously, please stop. Like, he has 13 wounds. The reason I know this is because I play against Tau. I mean, how many times have you heard me say this? My brother uses Longstrike. And I know that a Hammerhead has toughness 7, 3-up save, and 13 wounds. You get the extra wound over a Leman Russ, but I get the extra toughness. That's kind of how it balances. And he goes, no, Longstrike is a special character. And therefore, he has 14 wounds. And I say to him, that doesn't make sense because I've got a special character called Pask. And I open my coats and go, look, Pask is a special named character. He has 12 wounds. Flick to the next page with Tank Commander. Regular Tank Commander. He has 12 wounds. Flick to the Leman Russ at the back of the book. Same thing, 12 wounds. It's being a character doesn't give you anything extra. You're just in a tank. And he goes, no, well, again, he's like, bro, like, just because it's in the guard book doesn't mean it's in the Tau book. And I'm like, yeah, that's true, but it's, 8th edition's pretty streamlined, dude. Like, most armies have got fairly similar things. So it's definitely a case of you've only got 13 wounds. Being a character has nothing to do with it. He goes, look, Longstrike's got 40 wounds. I say, look, you know how important this is, and I know how important this is. He's definitely dead. And I said, if he dies, the game is, you're probably still going to win, mate. But at least it gives me a chance. I said, if I don't kill him, this game is over turn 1. And I know he's dead. I said, and I just say, look, you said this. I know I'm right on a lot of things, and this is the one thing I just can't back down on. And he goes, well, we'll get the TR over then, won't we? So Longstrike lives on 1 wound, and things just start going from bad to worse. And this is just, there's so many examples, guys. He makes up stratagems. He makes up unit statistics. He makes up weapon strengths, APs. Everything's going in his favor. And every time the TRO comes out, and that was the last time I called the TRO over, because it was very clear to me at this point that it wasn't doing anything. And I was just wasting everyone's time, and everyone's just getting annoyed with me. And I'm kind of looking like the prick here at this point, because I'm the one calling the TRO over every fucking time, okay? But despite all this, despite the just craziness of it, I managed to make a game of it, and it's incredibly close. Over the course of the next, it's a 6-turn game. Over the course of 5-6-turn game, anyway, we get to the final turn of the game, and despite everything that's happened, I've actually essentially managed to, but despite all of the chicanery, all of the scumbaggery, I may have been down, but I was not out. It was an uphill battle, but it was a battle nonetheless. And it actually ended up being incredibly close. It gets to the final turn of the game, and it's looking like it could be a draw. It might even be a minor win for me. Because in 8th edition, points were scored at the end. It wasn't round by round. And so by going pure aggression, by carrying out a massive blitzkrieg attack on my opponent, I was dominating the middle of the board, where the majority of the objectives were. And sure, his player was flying around doing stuff, but it was out of seeker missiles at this point, so it was just 2 of these burst cannons, and they were wounding me on 5, so I was kind of weathering that, and I was starting to really tangle his force up, and I'd done a great job at just massacring what infantry he had, which meant that I had the objective secured advantage. Every time he blows a chimera up, 10 infantry spill out into cover, holding an objective, and so he's really actually struggling. And it looks like I might just be able to squeak a draw. All I need to do to get this draw is to kill 1 Fire Warrior squad on an objective. Now, this Fire Warrior squad was out in the open, but they were next to an L-shaped wall. I couldn't see behind the L-shaped wall because the way it was facing was on my opponent's side, but they looked like they were absolutely out in the open. But at this point, I know what Bill's like. I don't assume anything. So I say to him, is that Fire Warrior squad holding the objective? And he goes, yes. I said to him, and all the models are there that I can see. And he goes, yes. I said, there's no one hiding behind that wall, is there? And he goes and bends down and he looks behind the wall in like almost an exaggerated fashion and goes, nope, there's no one behind him behind that wall. I'm like, excellent. So I know how I can draw this game. And he goes, okay, how? And I say, right, I'm going to disembark my infantry squad. They can't quite make it onto the objective. They're like an inch away, but they're pretty close to the L-shaped wall. And I'm able to then move the chimera onto the objective. And I say, if I kill that Fire Warrior squad, I'm going to hold more of the middle objectives, which will get me more of the primary points, but you'll end up getting more points on like Linebreaker and First Blood and Warlord and stuff like that. But the end result should be that the game is a draw. I've added it up, and he goes, okay, yeah, that seems right. I'm like, okay, so I've just got to kill 1 Fire Warrior squad. Excellent. So I unload my chimera into them, kill fair few. I unload the infantry squad into them, and there's like 4 left out in the open, and out of the wounds that I do, he fails 4 of them, and 4 of them die. I'm like, okay, awesome. That squad is now dead. My chimera moved on to the objective. It holds it. That's basically the only shooting that I need to do for the game. That's the only thing I need to do for the final turn. So that should be a draw then. And he goes, no. I'm like, okay, why is it not a draw? He says, because I'm going to spend 2 CP and I'm going to auto pass the last Fire Warrior that's on the objective. And I'm like, there's no one on the objective, mate. We just cleared it. And he says, no, there's one guy hidden behind the wall. And I look at him and I go, what are you on about? You said there was no one behind that wall. And he goes, I thought you meant a different wall. And I said, no, you didn't think I thought a different wall, because this is the only wall I can't see behind. And I asked you to check, and you leant down and looked at it and said there was no one there. And he goes, well, you should have checked, shouldn't you? And I said, I did check, mate. I asked you. And you should have told me there was someone behind the wall. And you actually said there was no one there. I'll never forget what he said. He looks me dead in the eye and he goes, well, you should have checked it yourself. Nothing in the rule book that says I have to answer your questions at all, rightly or wrongly. And I'm literally taking a step back. I physically take a step back to the table like, whoa, what the hell? And I go, okay, mate, if that's how you want to play it, don't worry, because I'll charge you with my infantry squad. They're 3 inches away from that wall. I can't physically fail the charge. I'm going to pile in and consolidate. Even if I don't kill the Fire Warrior, I'll get objectives secured onto the objective. He said, you can't, the game's over, the round's over. I went, this is the round. I said, the game's not over. We've not agreed to score. And I could easily have done this. And the only reason I didn't do it is because you told me there was no one behind that wall. So I couldn't physically do it. But now that I know there is someone there, I can charge it and I can get onto that objective and I can force the draw. And he goes, no, the game's over. We've agreed the score. The game's over. I said, I've not agreed the score. I've still got a charge phase. And I literally, as I go to pick the dice up to do my assault, and he's literally looking at me with like panic in his eyes. As I pick the dice up, the TO, like something out of Hollywood, guys, the TO calls across the hall, round over, dice down. And Will's face goes from one of literal panic to the biggest shit-eating grin you've ever seen in your life. And he goes, well, now the game's over. Needless to say, that post-game wrap-up was a bit frosty. But I decide I'm just going to let it go. Water under the bridge. I don't care. I never have to play the guy again. I can just keep an eye out for him. And I don't want to take my baggage from game 4 into game 5. Because if I'm not careful, I will be in a foul mood for my final game of the event. And that's just not fair on my other opponent. So I ended up just, pushing it down, going to game 5. And I ended up having a really, really fun final game of the event. Steel Legion did me proud. And I was able to win my final game. So I finished on a high. And by the time I've got home and I've had some KFC and I've had a bit, had a couple of drinks, I'm like, whatever, what a terrible experience. Just something to look back upon and laugh. Now, you might be forgiven for thinking this is where our tale ends. Surely it couldn't get any more insane and toxic than that. Oh, my, you naive, sweet summer child. This is just the tip of the iceberg. The crazy train has barely begun pulling out of the station. Because what happened post-game was even worse. You see, later that evening, I'm chatting away on Facebook Messenger, and a few people are asking me in the competitive groups, oh, how did that game against Will go? Were you able to beat him for us? And I said, I'm sorry, lads, I tried my best, but the bullshit was too strong, and there was just so many things that I just never had a chance. And they say, okay, yeah, tell us what he did. And so, right, I explain everything that happened, and they go, wow, I can't believe he was that bad. And then I get a private message, and it's from one of the guys that had warned me beforehand. And he goes, look, I've just seen what you've put in the main group. I don't want to stir the shit pot, but I'm in a group that Bill is in, and he's been putting some pretty harsh messages about you in there. And he then sends me some screenshots. And it's all about like, oh, that game was a piece of piss. Crush that guard, noob. Oh, yeah, he tried calling me out on a load of stuff, but he couldn't prove any of it. Ah, the old no codex trick worked again, winking face. All this kind of stuff. So the guy knew what he was doing. It wasn't even a case of he wasn't doing it on purpose. He knew exactly what he was doing. And so that really ground my gears. So I decided to make a video about the whole thing. I'm like, you know what? This guy is going to keep getting away with what he does, so I'm going to make a video. I'm going to set the world right. Realistically, though, I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. My channel at the time, I think, had 1,000 subscribers, if that was it. Maybe even less than that. It wasn't very many at all. Most of my videos would get 100, 200 views if I was lucky. And probably most of those was me furiously rechecking to see if anyone else had left a comment. All right, it was very much the beginning of my YouTube career. So I end up making the video, and it essentially is quite good at just allowing me to work through it. I don't think anyone's going to watch it, but at least I've got it all off my chest, and now I can go to sleep and I can have a good night's sleep, and I won't be up there going, I should have said this, I should have this. I've actually said something great. Don't expect it to go anywhere. I mean, at the end of the day, it's my word versus his word, right? I go to sleep, and I wake up the next day, and I go to work, and I don't really check on the video. I come back from work, and I notice that the video has got thousands of views. Now, bear in mind, I don't think I've had a video that's got 1,000 views at this point, let alone this thing is closing in on 5,000 or 6,000 views already, and it just keeps on going up and up and up. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? Why is this thing exploded? Surely it can't just be the fact that I've talked about encountering a cheater. There's a dime a dozen videos like that out there on the internet. But never underestimate the power of stupidity. All Bill needed to do was not acknowledge the video, not reply. And it would have been my word against his, and it would have been one angry young man shouting into the void. That would have been it. But I guess the video must have really got to him. I guess it's true what they say about psychopaths can't have any challenges to their ego. Because Bill had commented. Oh, had he commented. He left a really long comment, both on my video and on the Facebook post, detailing and acknowledging all of the points that I'd raised. And he admitted that he had cheated all of those things. He admitted that he had lied to me. He admitted that I'd checked. And he said that this is a game of competitive 40k. And he said the words that are now infamous on this channel. If you're a regular of this channel, you'll know what I'm talking about. He said, if you're not cheating in 40k, you're not trying hard enough. You don't want the win bad enough. He said that lying to your opponent is an important part of warfare. That disinformation and the fog of war is something that can be accurately and should be accurately represented on the tabletop. If it was a real battle, you wouldn't tell your opponent what you had and where your forces were. And by doing this, he completely and utterly incriminated himself. But also by doing this, people started taking screenshots of his reply, of him admitting what he'd done, showing no remorse for it. And they started sharing it and sharing the link to the video. And the video started exploding. Reddit posts were being made by it, Daka posts. People were going, wow, look at this guy who is accused of cheating, and he's come out and gone, yeah, I did, and it's a skill issue for my opponent, bro. Naturally, people can't believe what they're seeing, so they go and find the video, or the video gets shared to them. They go and see the comment, and they start replying to it. And any rational person at this point might have gone, oh, shit, landed myself in hot water here. I should probably delete the comment and move on. But Bill is dug in. He will not accept any challenges. And so he ends up getting into a series over the course of the next 24 hours, a series of heated arguments with people online, on the Facebook post, on the YouTube video as well, defending his position at every single turn. And then what starts happening is more people come forward and go, oh, I played Bill as well, and he did all this stuff against me, and I just felt like I couldn't do anything about it. I'm so glad someone's finally stood up and said something to him. And again, all Bill needed to do was ignore those comments, and it would have just been people jumping on, it would have looked like people just jumping on the bandwagon. But no, he goes, I remember that game, blah, blah, blah. And same thing again, starts arguing with them. So he's just incriminating himself further and further, more and more. And people are like, whoa, dude, you've got a serious problem. But wait, there's more. Because Bill decides that the best kind of defense is a good offense. And so he starts fighting back. And he starts making counter accusations against me. And he says, Tim, you're a cheater as well. You use loaded dice. We've got some of your custom dice that you use, because I've got my little mordianglory dice, and we've tested them and they're loaded. And I see this comment, and I've stayed out of it up until this point, because I'm like, I'm not engaging with crazy, but I can't let this stand. So I go, okay, mate, you haven't got any of my dice, and I can prove it because I put an order for 50 dice in. And I take a picture with the order, with the number of dice, and I take a picture with next to it, the 50 dice lined up in 5 neat rows of 10. I go, so you haven't got any of my dice, so you're lying again, aren't you? And by the old gods and the new, it was like I'd kicked the hornet's nest. The crazy train was in full steam and there was no slowing it down now. Reply after reply after reply, all of these crazy accusations, and they stop being accusations, they start becoming threats. He says, well, my stepdad is in the police and he's going to investigate you. You better hope he doesn't find anything. Now, I'm not a legal expert. I don't know if it is illegal to send someone a public message threatening them with your family connections to the police. It's certainly immoral, whatever it is. It also smacks a little bit of my dad's bigger than your dad, which is very immature. But that wasn't even the worst one. The final message that Will posted publicly on this Facebook post that I put up was, my 40k career is ruined. my life is ruined. I've just taken all of my glass trophies that I've won over the years, and I've shot them all up and destroyed them with a crossbow. And then there's a space, and he just puts, I wonder what I will shoot next. ... So, yeah, that's pretty bad. Certainly an implication there, to say the least. Naturally, people see this comment and they quickly jump on it. And they go, whoa, mate, are you threatening violence there? Bill quickly realizes that he has actually stepped over the mark. He's not completely stupid, and deletes the comment, but not before it's been seen by loads of people, and one or two have even managed to screenshot it and share it round. At this point, Bill decides to switch tactics and to message me directly. But it's basically just a string of insults over the next day or so, increasingly colourful, but with less and less enthusiasm each time. I stoically refuse to reply to him. I'm like, you know what? I'm not going near that crazy with a barge pole. And eventually, he naturally expends all of his energy. He must have realized he'd crossed the line with the threats, even if he hadn't done it intentionally. The implication was there. So like I said, it was just a string of insults. You're a piece of shit, you're filth, you're toxic, you're scum, anything and everything you could think of. He was just slinging it at me. But eventually, it dies out. And that essentially was the end of the matter. Bill stopped messaging me after a day, noticing that he wasn't getting any response out of me. And for what I can tell, he retired from 40k. I've not seen his name pop up before or since. And the excitement around the whole thing eventually died down as it does. The internet moved on to the next exciting thing that was happening. And so we come to the end of our tale. The story of Bill the Bastard. The most toxic and, dare I say, insane person I have ever met in Warhammer 40k. But before we go, I'd just like to say thank you for watching, and if you've got any similar stories, make sure you put them down in that comment section below. I would love to read them. If you've enjoyed today's video, make sure you smash that like button like it's a big titty out our girlfriend, and also subscribe to never miss an episode. And if you found today's video particularly fun or interesting, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. It's thanks to the generous support of my channel members and patrons that I'm able to go to lots of tournaments, and I am able to bring back these tales from the front line. One of the big perks of becoming a channel member or patron is you do gain access to the Mordy and Glory Discord server, which is an online community of over 1,000 active people. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We're always talking about tournaments and tactics and strategy and army lists. We also have a hobbying and painting section, and of course, a pretty spicy meme channel as well. And I'd just like to take a moment to say a big thank you to all of the latest channel members. So thank you to Alquist, For Russ and the Allfather, AGI Laboratory, Kilper Machine, Mr. Meltdown, NG Dubs, Isaac, Dave D, Adam Harris, Swordsman Smith 87, Benjamin E, Damned Legion, S. Ellis, and Gabriel Helsing. Thank you for doing your part. I also want to shout out the latest Patreons too, so a big thank you to Decommissar357, Tristan Wood, Trey Sondrini, Michael S, and Cocaine Cowboy. And last, but certainly not least, I would like to say a massive thank you to all of the top tier Patreon supporters. These are the War Masters, the people that have gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a massive thank you to Alan Blunt III, Bonbon Vert, Mark Panconi, Ridemaster 134-1, Ross Miller, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Diesel Fox, and August Varney. Thank you guys for your incredibly generous support. It makes a huge difference, and it is a huge part of how we're able to do Mordy and Glory full time now. I hope you've all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.